Do I deserve to be alone? Margaret whispered this at 2 a.m., standing at my door in wool socks and an oversized cardigan. No coat. Chicago, January, cutting through everything. Hello, I'm Daniel. I'm 30, code for a living, and I've mastered the art of being alone without being lonely. Or so I told myself. Margaret's, my neighbor 50, widowed 8 months ago. The kind of beautiful that makes you feel underdressed in your own house. 3 years of polite waves, nothing more. Until that night, your heat's broken, I asked, already reaching for my toolkit. She nodded, vulnerability cracking through her usual composure. I didn't know who else would answer. I always would. Following her through the hedge gap felt like crossing into another life entirely. But before we begin, let me know where in the world you're watching from today. It's always fascinating seeing who's joining us from around the world. I'd lived next door to Margaret Harrison for 3 years, though lived next door suggests more connection than we actually had. Our interactions stayed limited to distant waves over the fence and the occasional mixed-up mail delivery. The postal service seemed determined to confuse our house numbers despite them being clearly marked. She fascinated me, if I'm being honest. Not in an intrusive way, just noticed things. The way she moved with this innate grace, like someone who belonged in art galleries rather than our modest suburban street. Her auburn hair had started gathering silver streaks at the temples, but it only made her more striking. When she worked in her garden, she wore wide-brimmed hats that cast dappled shadows across her face. I marked time in our neighborhood. By the phases of Margaret's widowhood, 8 months had passed since Robert's death. First came the parade of casserole-bearing neighbors. Their covered dishes and concerned expressions a steady stream through her front door. Then the visits slowed, as they always do. People return to their own lives, leaving grief to settle like dust in empty rooms. These days, her house stayed quiet. Sometimes I'd see her reading on her back porch, wrapped in what I assumed was one of Robert's old cardigans. That January night, I was deep in debugging code at my desk. The joys of freelance work meant keeping weird hours, and 2 a.m. found me, squinting at my monitor, trying to track down an elusive error. The soft knock at my front door nearly made me jump out of my skin. I wasn't expecting anyone, obviously, who knocks at 2 a.m. Through the porch light's glow, I made out Margaret's familiar silhouette. She stood there in an oversized cardigan and wool socks, no coat, despite the freezing temperature. My chest tightened at how vulnerable she looked, arms wrapped around herself against the cold. "I'm so sorry to bother you this late," she said when I opened the door. Her voice carried a slight tremor that had nothing to do with the cold. "My heat's gone out." I didn't know who else to ask. Something shifted in that moment. Maybe it was the late hour stripping away our practiced neighborly distance. Maybe it was seeing her there, uncertainty written across features I'd only ever observed from afar. Whatever it was, the air between us felt different, charged with something I couldn't quite name. "Of course, I'll help," I said, already reaching for my toolkit in the hallway closet. "Please, come in where it's warm while I grab what I need." She hesitated at the threshold, and I realized this was the first time either of us had entered the other's space. 3 years of carefully maintained distance, dissolved by a broken furnace, and the particular intimacy of middle-of-the-night vulnerability. The moment stretched, delicate as frost on a window pane. Then Margaret stepped inside, her wool socks silent on my hardwood floor. Under the warm light of my entryway, I noticed the slight dishevelment of her hair, how her cardigan was buttoned unevenly. It made her seem more human somehow. Less like the elegant figure I'd observed from a distance, and more like someone who could need things, need help, need company. I found myself moving slower than necessary as I gathered my tools, oddly reluctant to break this strange midnight bubble where normal rules of neighborly distance seemed suspended. Margaret stood in my living room, arms still wrapped around herself, looking at the organized chaos of my workspace, dual monitors glowing with lines of code, empty coffee cups, and scattered notepapers. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything crucial," she said, gesturing to my computer setup. Nothing that can't wait, I assured her, though I'd been fighting that bug for hours. Shall we take a look at your furnace? She nodded, and something in her expression, relief mixed with lingering uncertainty, made me want to fix more than just her heating system. But that wasn't what she'd asked for. And I reminded myself that good neighbors respect boundaries. Even at 2 a.m., when those boundaries feel strangely fluid, I grabbed my flashlight, and we stepped out into the January night. The cold air bit at my exposed skin, making me acutely aware of Margaret's lack of proper out. Without thinking, I shrugged off my jacket and offered it to her. She looked at me with surprise, that unnamed something flickering between us again. "Oh, I couldn't please," I said softly. "It's freezing out here." Following Margaret through the narrow gap in our shared hedge felt surreal. I'd passed this spot hundreds of times, but never at night, never with purpose. The darkness seemed to rewrite the meaning of every familiar landmark: her garden bench, the wind chimes, the stone path leading to her back door. Inside, the house was significantly colder than outside. Our breath formed small clouds in the dim light. Margaret moved through her home with the muscle memory of someone who'd traced these paths countless times, flicking on just enough lamps to guide us. The warm pools of light revealed rooms full of carefully chosen furniture, artwork that spoke of years of collecting, shelves of well-loved books. Everything felt both familiar and strange. Like seeing a photograph of yourself from an angle you'd never considered. The ancient thermostat mounted on her hallway wall looked like something from a museum. Its yellowed plastic housing had probably been cutting edge when installed decades ago. I removed the cover carefully, aware of Margaret standing close enough that I could smell the faint lavender of her shampoo. "I'll make some tea while you work," she said softly, as if speaking at normal volume might shatter something fragile in the air. "Would you like some? That would be nice, thank you." I kept my voice equally gentle, matching the hushed atmosphere. I examined the thermostat's inner workings with my flashlight. I heard Margaret moving through her kitchen with practiced quietness. The soft clink of cups, the whisper of cabinet doors, the muted burble of her electric kettle, all these sounds painted a picture of routine comfort. Even in this unusual circumstance, the thermostat's problem wasn't complex, just delicate work, requiring patience. By the time Margaret returned with 2 steaming mugs, I was nearly finished. She set them on her dining room table, and we settled into adjacent chairs to wait and see if my repair would hold. "It's strange," Margaret said after a while, both hands wrapped around her mug. "The house feels so different now, too big, somehow." After 25 years of sharing every space with someone, she trailed off, staring into her tea. I never realized how much of my existence was defined by not being alone. Now I have to learn how to be just me again, and I'm not sure I remember how. Her vulnerability struck a chord. "I understand something of that," I offered. "Working remotely, I sometimes realize I've gone days without having a real conversation with anyone. Just emails and chat messages. It's not the same kind of alone." But I shrugged, not wanting to compare my situation too directly with hers. "No, but it is a kind of isolation," she nodded. "Robert used to joke that I talked enough for both of us, but even our quiet moments were shared. Now the silence feels," she gestured vaguely at the darkness beyond her windows. "Heavy?" I supplied, and she smiled in recognition. We sat in companionable quiet for a moment, and I found myself wanting to lift that heaviness somehow. "You know what they say about thermostats?" I ventured, immediately questioning my judgment. "They have commitment issues, they're always hot and cold." It was a terrible joke, the kind that deserves polite groans at best. But Margaret didn't groan. She laughed a real unexpected laugh that transformed her entire face. The elegant reserve I'd observed from afar melted away, revealing someone younger, lighter. Her eyes crinkled at the corners, and color bloomed in her cheeks. It was like watching a different person emerge from behind a carefully maintained facade. Just then, the furnace kicked on with a decisive thrum. Warm air began flowing through the vents, confirming my repair had worked. By any normal social metric, this was my cue to leave. Problem solved. Neighbor helped, Boundaries maintained. Neither of us moved. The moment stretched between us, filled with something I couldn't quite name. Recognition, maybe? Understanding? We'd shared something more intimate. Then a late-night furnace repair we'd admitted to our different kinds of loneliness. Found unexpected common ground in the strange hours between midnight and dawn. Margaret's hands were still wrapped around her mug, though the tea must have gone cold. The warm air continued to pulse through the vents, but we sat in that delicate silence, as if moving might break whatever spell had allowed this midnight honesty. Margaret's fingers traced abstract patterns on her empty mug. "Since you're so good with thermostats," she hesitated, then shook her head. "No, I'm sorry. I shouldn't take advantage of your kindness. It's just that my kitchen faucet has been dripping, and I can take a look," I offered, watching relief flutter across her features. "Not tonight, but maybe tomorrow evening. You really wouldn't mind?" I studied her face in the soft lamplight, noting how carefully she was watching me in return. She was looking for pity. I realized the kind, well-meaning neighbors had probably shown when bringing those casseroles, the kind she definitely didn't want to see. "Actually, you'd be doing me a favor," I said, meaning it more than I'd expected. "I spend too much time staring at code on my screen. A reason to use my hands for something real would be nice." Something in her expression softened at this reframing, as if I'd given her permission to accept help without feeling like a burden. "Tomorrow evening then," she said. And this time her smile reached her eyes. The next day crawled by in a haze of video meetings and debugging sessions. When evening finally arrived, I found myself double-checking my toolkit before heading next door. The porch light was already on. As if she'd been watching for me, Margaret answered my knock, wearing a casual sweater and dark slacks, still elegant, but more relaxed than I'd ever seen her in our years of fence waves. She led me to her kitchen, where the offending faucet marked time with steady drips. "It started about a week ago," she explained, stepping back to give me room to work. "I tried tightening it myself, but the repair itself was straightforward, just a worn washer that needed replacing. I had the right parts in my kit, and the work went quickly." Margaret stayed nearby, asking occasional questions about what I was doing. Her genuine interest made the task feel less like charity and more like sharing knowledge. "There," I said finally, testing the handle. "Good as new, thank you." She hesitated, then added, with quiet determination, "You have to let me feed you dinner, as thanks." Something in her tone made it clear, this wasn't just politeness. "You don't have to, please." She gestured at her immaculate kitchen. "I made too much anyway. I always do. I haven't adjusted to cooking for one yet." The admission hung between us, heavy with unspoken meaning. I thought about my own kitchen, the stack of takeout menus, the freezer full of meals for one. "Well, when you put it that way," I smiled, "how can I refuse?" Dinner was a revelation: homemade lasagna that put my frozen versions to shame, served with a simple salad and warm bread. We sat at her kitchen table rather than the more formal dining room, and conversation flowed easier than the night before. Maybe it was the normal hour, or the warm food, or simply the lack of furnace-related crises, but everything felt more natural. "I hate cooking for just myself," Margaret admitted, breaking off a piece of bread. "It feels pointless, somehow, but I can't seem to make smaller portions. If it helps, I've been living on takeout and frozen dinners," I confessed. "My mum would be horrified." She looked at my plate, now empty except for a few crumbs. "We could," she paused, considering her words carefully. "This might sound strange, but what if we made this a regular thing? Say, Tuesday evenings. I need someone to cook for. You clearly need real food." She let the suggestion trail off, leaving space for me to refuse. The practical framing made it easier for both of us, I think. A simple exchange. Her need to cook for someone, my need for proper meals. We could pretend it was just convenience, just neighbors helping each other out. "Tuesdays would work perfectly," I said, keeping my tone casual. "If you're sure, it wouldn't be too much trouble." "Not at all." She began gathering plates, her movements more energetic than before. Next week, then next Tuesday, I confirmed, standing to help clear the table. Same time, we settled the details with careful attention to logistics, neither of us acknowledging the warm current of anticipation already humming beneath our practical arrangements. Just neighbors sharing meals, we told ourselves, just making sense of our separate soul-it. It's funny how quickly habits form, how icily extraordinary things become ordinary. Those Tuesday dinners with Margaret settled into my life like they'd always been there, filling a space I hadn't known was empty. We developed our own small rituals. She'd text around lunch to tell me what she was planning to make. I'd show up precisely at 6:30, and somehow, the evenings would stretch until the clock surprised us both. Margaret took it upon herself to educate me about wine, her eyes lighting up when I admitted my usual selection method involved picking bottles with interesting labels. "Oh, we can do better than that," she'd laughed, pulling out a well-worn wine guide. "Much better." She taught me about tannins and regions, about why certain wines paired perfectly with specific foods. I learned to swirl the glass properly, to note the legs running down the sides, to actually smell before tasting. But mostly, I learned to love how animated she became while sharing this knowledge. How her hands moved expressively as she explained the difference between Old World and New World vintages. In exchange, I helped Margaret navigate the smartphone. Her children had insisted she upgrade to last Christmas. "I'm terrified I'll delete something important," she admitted one evening, holding the device like it might bite. "All my photos are in here somewhere, but I never know which button is safe to press." Her genuine concern was oddly endearing. We spent an entire dinner going through basic features, and I showed her how to back up her photos to the cloud. "See, now even if you accidentally delete something, it's not really gone," I explained. Watching relief soften her shoulders, it became our pattern sheet share some aspect of refined living I'd never considered. And I'd helped demystify the technology she approached with such careful hesitation. The exchange felt balanced, comfortable. Maybe that's why I didn't notice how the air had slowly changed between us, growing warmer, more charged with each passing week, until that March evening. "There's this meditation app I use sometimes," I said, reaching for her phone. "It might help with your insomnia." The admission about her sleep troubles had come during last week's dinner, dropped casually between bites of coco vendot. Margaret moved closer to see the screen as I pulled up the App Store. "I'm not sure I understand the appeal of meditating with a phone," she said, but her tone was curious rather than dismissive. "It's really simple," I assured her, downloading the app. "Here, I'll show you my favorite program." She leaned in as I opened the app, her shoulder barely brushing mine. The familiar scent of her perfume, something subtle and expensive I'd never dare try naming, mingled with the remnants of the evening's cooking. I tapped through the menu, finding the breathing exercise I used most often. "You just follow the guide's voice," I explained, reaching to adjust the volume. That's when it happened. Margaret moved to tap the screen at the same moment, and our fingers met over the glowing display. We both froze. The meditation guide's calm voice continued. "Breathe in slowly through your nose." Neither of us moved. My finger rested against hers, the point of contact suddenly the most acute sensation in my world. The phone screen dimmed between us, then went dark, but still we didn't pull away. "And out through your mouth," I counted 3 full breaths. Aware of every millisecond, every subtle shift in the air. I knew I should move my hand. Knew this moment was stretching far beyond any reasonable explanation. Knew my heart shouldn't be beating quite this hard over such a simple touch. Margaret shifted slightly, not away, just adjusting to the reality of what was happening. Her eyes remained fixed on our touching fingers, as if looking anywhere else might shatter whatever this was becoming. Staying present in this moment, the guide's gentle instruction felt almost absurd in its accidental accuracy. Present, I had never been more present in my life, never more aware of every subtle sensation, the warmth of her finger against mine, the soft sound of her breathing, the way the kitchen's overhead light caught the silver threads in her hair. Well, Margaret finally whispered, her voice barely audible over the app's continued guidance, I suppose this is rather effective at creating presence, isn't it? The words hung in the air between us, acknowledging the moment without breaking it. My finger remained against hers, neither of us quite willing to be the one who ended this tentative connection. The meditation app continued its gentle guidance, but neither of us was listening anymore. My finger stayed against Margaret's, this small point of contact becoming an anchor in the suddenly thick air of her kitchen. The overhead light hummed softly, casting warm shadows across the granite countertop where her phone lay dark between us. My last relationship ended because I was emotionally unavailable. I found myself saying, the words spilling out before I could question them. That's what she told me, anyway. Probably wasn't wrong. Margaret's finger shifted slightly against mine, not withdrawing, but adjusting, acknowledging. The touch felt deliberate now, no longer something we could pretend was accidental. I do this thing, I continued, studying our connected fingers rather than meeting her eyes, where I retreat into code when things get complicated. Lines of programming make sense, you know? Variables behave according to rules. People don't. No, Margaret agreed softly. We certainly don't. A car passed outside, its headlights briefly painting moving patterns across her kitchen walls. In that momentary illumination, I caught the gentle understanding in her expression. Robert's illness changed everything, she said after a pause, her voice carrying the weight of long-held thoughts finally finding voice. Our marriage became something else entirely. I wasn't his wife anymore, not really. I was his nurse, his advocate, his caretaker. She drew a careful breath. I grieved our relationship long before I had to grieve him. I turned my palm upward then, a deliberate invitation. Her fingers settled into mine properly, no longer the single point of contact but a real connection. Her hand felt smaller than I'd imagined, but somehow stronger too. The hardest part, she continued, her thumb brushing absently against my palm, is the relief I felt when he passed. It's terrible, isn't it? To feel relief alongside the sorrow. To know that beneath all the genuine grief, there was this tiny voice, whispering finally. Grief isn't simple, I said quietly. It doesn't follow rules either. No, it doesn't. Margaret's fingers tightened slightly in mine. I've been grieving things I never expected to grieve. Like how I lost myself in his dying. How I forgot who I was outside of taking care of him. I think I've been grieving too, I admitted. Not a person, but the ability to be present. To really be there with someone. I built walls out of computer screens and never learned how to lower them properly. The kitchen felt impossibly intimate in that moment. The space between us charged with shared vulnerability. Margaret's hand remained warm in mine, neither of us acknowledging how unusual this was. How many boundaries we were quietly crossing. My children worry, she said, a smile touching her voice. They call every Sunday, asking if I'm lonely, if I'm getting out there. They mean well. But my parents keep sending me links to dating sites, I offered, matching her tone. Every conversation somehow circles back to their friend's daughter, who's just perfect for me. We both laughed softly, the sound mingling in the quiet kitchen. Her fingers stayed entwined with mine, and I realized I couldn't remember the last time I'd held someone's hand like this deliberately, without intention to let go. It's strange, Margaret mused, how people want to fix loneliness with solutions that feel lonelier somehow, as if matching profiles and arranged coffee dates could fill the actual gaps. I nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. The dating apps my parents championed felt like another screen to hide behind, another way to avoid real connection while pretending to seek it. Margaret's fingers slipped from mine with gentle reluctance, like a tide drawing back from shore. She stood, gathering our wine glasses, though neither was empty. I watched her move to the counter, noting how she kept her back to me, shoulders set in a way that spoke of gathering courage. The kitchen's familiar warmth felt different now, charged with possibility and uncertainty. Margaret remained by the counter longer than refreshing drinks required. Her hands braced against the granite edge. I keep thinking, she began, voice steady but careful, about how much younger you are than me. My breath caught, but I stayed silent, letting her continue. By any conventional measure, this she gestured vaguely between us without turning. Whatever this is becoming, would be considered inappropriate. I have children your age. I was married longer than you've been. She paused, searching for words. Adult, I offered softly, trying to gentle the moment with a touch of humor. She turned then, wine forgotten, meeting my eyes directly. The kitchen light caught the silver in her hair, and I was struck again by how naturally elegant she was, even in this moment of vulnerability. You make me feel like myself again, she said, the words carrying the weight of confession, not Robert's widow, not the mother of grown children who need me to be okay, not the neighbor everyone's been tiptoeing around for months. Just Margaret. I stood slowly, drawn toward her but careful to maintain space between us. The counter separated us like a gentle boundary neither of us was ready to cross. You make me feel real, I told her, the truth of it surprising me even as I spoke. More present than I've been in years. When I'm here, in your kitchen, I'm not hiding behind screens or code. I'm actually here. Margaret's fingers traced patterns on the counter's surface, her eyes following the movement. Is that enough? She asked quietly, feeling real together. Is that enough to risk the judgment? The complications? She looked up again, her gaze direct. The mismatch everyone else will see. The question hung between us, heavy with implications. I considered it carefully, knowing this moment felt like standing in a doorway, both of us hesitating to step through. The practical part of my mind understood her concerns, the age difference, the potential gossip, her children's reaction, my parents' confusion. But that same mind also recognized something rare in how easily we'd moved from neighbors to whatever this careful dance was becoming. What do you want? I asked finally, genuinely uncertain myself. Part of me feared her answer, while another part feared my own response to whatever she might say. The refrigerator hummed in the silence, a mundane counterpoint to the weight of the moment. Margaret's hand stilled on the counter, and I watched her gather her thoughts, appreciating how she never rushed to fill silence with empty words. I don't know, she admitted finally, her voice barely above a whisper. She met my eyes again, and I saw the same mix of uncertainty and attraction I felt reflected there. But I know I don't want you to leave yet. The simple honesty of her statement hit me with unexpected force. It wasn't a declaration or a demand, just a quiet truth offered. Without expectation, I remained where I was, letting the moments stretch between us, understanding that how we handled this pause would shape whatever came next. Margaret stood framed by her kitchen cabinets. The woman who'd knocked on my door that winter night now transformed into someone who could shake the foundations of both our carefully ordered lives. The distance between us felt both too far and not far enough a perfect metaphor for everything about this situation. The next 2 weeks felt like walking a tightrope. Margaret and I kept our Tuesday dinners, but something had shifted since that night in her kitchen. We maintained careful physical distance, both of us processing the weight of our previous conversation. The easy flow of our earlier meals gave way to a more measured dance, still warm, but wrapped in layers of consideration. Found myself checking my phone constantly between dinners, hoping to see her name appear on my screen. The habit formed without conscious decision, just a new reflex born of wanting some connection beyond our weekly meetings. Margaret did text occasionally questions about phone features we'd discussed or recipes she thought I might enjoy. Found this pasta dish that's actually manageable for beginners, she wrote one afternoon. Thought of you when I saw it, involves exactly 3 steps. But neither of us addressed the elephant in the room. The tension hummed beneath every message, unspoken but present. I lost count of how many messages I drafted and deleted. Each attempt to bridge the careful space between us felt either too forward or too hesitant. Been thinking about our conversation. Maybe we could talk more about. I miss how easy things felt before. None of them captured what I wanted to say, so they remained unsent. Digital ghosts of conversations we weren't having. When Tuesday arrived again, the awkwardness was palpable. We both spoke with excessive politeness, the kind reserved for distant acquaintances rather than people who'd shared midnight confidences. Our usual comfortable silences turned stiff. We kept accidentally talking over each other, then falling quiet in a way that felt nothing like our previous easy companionship. The scrape of utensils against plates filled the gaps in conversation. I found myself studying the pattern of my plate to avoid meeting Margaret's eyes, wondering if this was how things would be now, forever careful, forever holding back. Halfway through the meal, Margaret set down her fork with sudden decisiveness. The sharp click against her plate made me look up. "This is exhausting," she said, her voice carrying the same directness I'd first heard that night. She knocked on my door. "We're adults. Whatever this is or isn't, we should be able to handle it without this performance of distance." The relief of hearing her name, it loosened something in my chest. "I've been so worried about ruining our friendship," I admitted, setting down my own fork. "But keeping this careful distance feels like ruining it anyway." Margaret nodded, running her finger along the stem of her wine glass. "We need to make an actual decision instead of living in this limbo. This middle ground isn't fair to either of us." "No," I agreed softly, "it's not." We finished dinner with the acknowledgement hanging between us. But it felt different now, less like a wall and more like a door waiting to be opened. The rest of the week passed slowly. I tried to focus on work, on the lines of code that usually absorbed my attention so completely. But my mind kept drifting to Margaret's kitchen, to the weight of possibility in her words. Saturday morning, my phone buzzed. Margaret's name appeared on the screen, and beneath it, 5 words that made my heart skip. "I'm tired of being careful." I stared at the message, reading it over and over. The simplicity of it, the honesty, seemed to cut through all the complications we'd been wrestling with. My finger hovered over the screen, all those unsent messages of the past 2 weeks suddenly irrelevant in the face of her clarity. The cursor blinked, waiting for my response, while outside my window, the morning light painted everything in shades of possibility. I stood at the edge of Margaret's garden that Saturday afternoon, watching her work with methodical focus. She knelt in the soft earth, creating perfect holes for spring bulbs with mechanical precision, each one measured and spaced just so. The morning's text message hung between us, as tangible as the spring breeze. She didn't look up, but I knew. She sensed my presence. Her shoulders tensed slightly, then relaxed. "I plant bulbs when I need to believe in the future," she said, pressing another tulip bulb into the dark soil. "It's an act of faith, really. Burying something dormant and trusting it'll bloom months from now." I moved closer, careful not to disturb her carefully plotted garden grid. "Your text," I started, but she continued as if I hadn't spoken. "I've been thinking about what everyone will say," she said, smoothing soil over another bulb. "My children will probably think I'm betraying their father's memory. They mean well, but they want me frozen in time, their grieving mother, predictable and safe." The afternoon sun caught the silver in her hair as she worked. "I've been thinking about that too," I admitted. "About whether I'm taking advantage of your vulnerability, if this is just loneliness, making connections where they shouldn't exist." Margaret paused, her hands covered in rich black soil. "That's a fair question," she said. "One I've asked myself. Are we just 2 lonely people making something out of nothing? And the age gap?" I added softly. "We can't pretend it doesn't exist." She sat back on her heels, finally looking up at me. "No, we can't. Just like I can't pretend my children's opinions don't matter, or that this wouldn't complicate both our lives considerably." I watched her return to planting, each movement precise and grounding. "So maybe we should examine each worry," I suggested. "Figure out which ones are real concerns and which are just external noise." Margaret nodded, patting the soil around another bulb. "All right. Let's start with your fear about taking advantage. Do you really think that's what's happening here?" I considered carefully. "No," I said finally. "You're one of the most self-aware people I know. If anything, you've been more cautious than I have." And my children's reaction, she continued. That's valid. It will be difficult for them, but is protecting them from discomfort worth denying myself a chance at happiness? What about the age gap? I asked. That's not just external noise. Margaret stood then, brushing soil from her gardening pants. No, it's not. It will matter. In some ways, but does it matter more than how we feel when we're together? More than how you make me laugh, or how I feel more present with you than I have in years? She still had soil on her hands. And somehow, that small detail, this elegant woman with dirt under her fingernails, made everything clearer. So what are we saying? I asked. That some fears are valid, but not insurmountable. I'm saying, Margaret met my eyes directly, that I want to try this, if you do. Not because we're lonely, not because it's convenient, but because something real is happening here. Something that makes me feel alive again. The response came without hesitation. I've wanted to kiss you since you laughed at my terrible thermostat joke that first night. That transformative smile I'd first witnessed in her kitchen spread across her face, again, turning her from careful widow to simply Margaret. Then stop standing so far away, she said softly. I crossed the garden space between us, mindful of her carefully planted bulbs. Each step bringing me closer to this woman who planted flowers as acts of faith in the future. Our future, maybe, if we were brave enough to choose it. I crossed those final steps to reach her, my heart drumming steadily against my ribs. Margaret tilted her face up slightly, letting me choose the moment. When I kissed her, it was gentle, questioning. Her lips were soft against mine, hesitant at first, then responding with growing certainty as neither of us pulled away. When we parted, she kept her eyes closed for a moment, as if memorizing the sensation. The garden's evening light softened around us. Margaret took my hand, her fingers still earth-stained, and led me toward her house. In the kitchen, she paused. To wash her hands, thoroughly understood this small ritual as the breath we both needed, a moment to be certain. We settled on her living room couch, close but not touching, and began the careful work of setting boundaries. I want to take things slow, she said. But I need to know what that means to you. I worry about rushing you through grief, I admitted. About being a distraction rather than something real. And I worry you're settling for someone aged. Margaret countered softly. We agreed to check in regularly, to be honest about our comfort levels. The conversation felt mature, measured, but underneath ran an electric current of possibility. I haven't been with anyone since James, Margaret said quietly. Not in any way. It's been over a year for me too, I replied, wanting her to know. We were both stepping carefully into this newness. The evening settled deeper around us as we talked. Our bodies gradually shifting closer on the couch, without either of us quite deciding to move. Margaret told me about the good years with James' camping trips, where everything went wrong but became favorite stories. The way he'd bring her coffee in bed every Sunday morning. I'm not trying to replace him, she said softly. Or forget. I need you to understand that. I nodded, then shared my own truth, how I'd chosen lines of code over connection time and again, retreating into work whenever relationships got complicated. I tend to isolate, I admitted. You should know that about me. We discussed the practical things to what, to tell curious neighbors, when she might tell her children. Whether keeping our separate houses made sense for now. Throughout our talk, small touches anchored us. Margaret's hand rested on my knee when making important points. I traced the lines of her palm while listening, memorizing their pattern. Eventually, she grew quiet, studying my face with an expression I couldn't quite read, something between wanting and uncertainty. Would you like to stay? She asked, then quickly added, staying doesn't have to mean anything more than not leaving yet. I understood exactly what she was offering and what she wasn't ready for. Yes, I said simply. I'd like to stay. Margaret's hand was warm in mine as she led me upstairs, her fingers gentle but certain. At her bedroom door, she paused, turning to face me. The guest room is made up, if you'd prefer, she offered quietly. I squeezed her hand. I'm wherever you want me. Her bedroom felt deeply personal, intimate in ways beyond the obvious. Framed photographs lined her dresser, ones she didn't turn away. Books crowded her nightstand, reading glasses perched atop them. We navigated getting ready for bed with endearing uncertainty, taking turns in the bathroom. Margaret handed me folded pajamas with a sad smile. James never wore these. I bought them last Christmas, but she didn't need to finish. In bed. We lay facing each other, maintaining a careful space between our bodies. Margaret reached across that space to find my hand, and we whispered about small things: forecast, which bulbs might bloom first, whether the tomatoes should go near the fence. Everything except the weight of this moment. Then Margaret shifted closer, tucking herself against me. I wrapped my arm around her, feeling tension leave her body completely. "I feel safe," she whispered. We drifted towards sleep like that, bodies, learning each other's rhythms through cotton fabric, asking nothing more of the night. When I opened my eyes, Margaret was already awake, a silhouette against her bedroom window. Morning light painted gentle colors across the hardwood floor, and 2 coffee mugs waited on the dresser. She wore that same oversized cardigan from the night she first knocked on my door. But everything about her seemed different, no more grounded, more certain of herself. She turned, lifting one of the mugs. 2 sugars, splash of cream. The fact that she'd noticed how I took my coffee during our dinners made something warm spread through my chest. We stood together at the window, watching the sunrise paint the neighborhood in soft gold. Neither of us felt the need to fill the silence. It was enough just to be there, sharing the quiet start of a new day. "I left something for you downstairs," Margaret said finally, her voice soft. In her kitchen, I found a note propped against the coffee maker. "The furnace is working perfectly. Thank you for fixing more than you know." I understood what she meant: the broken pieces of herself she thought would never work right again. Over breakfast, we talked about our plans. I had code reviews waiting, she had a list of errands. But we agreed on dinner not because it was Tuesday, but because we wanted to. When I left through our hedge gap, Margaret watched from her doorway. We'd started something neither of us fully understood, but we both chose to keep exploring it. If tonight's ending felt right, hit subscribe and share this with one person who needs a gentle story. I'll be here tomorrow with another